Good evening, good evening, good evening. Welcome to drum roll family. Welcome to season two of Sidewalk Talk. Welcome to season two. This is our premiere episode of season two. So it is the 11th episode of Sidewalk Talk, and I am so excited. I'm so excited to be continuing this journey with you all and to be continuing to talk about important topics, right? So, Sidewalk Talk is an online platform where we have real talk about the streets of Newark, New Jersey to gain insight, to clarify misconceptions, and to get a call to action from frontline workers. So, we gain insight by having nuanced conversations and unpacking truths that aren't really necessarily being discussed. We look to clarify misconceptions about groups of people who are often misunderstood or unheard based on assumptions about their lives. And then we try to get a call to action. We lift up the local organizations of Newark, New Jersey, and our friends from other places to be able to speak about the work that is being done and bring on experts onto Sidewalk Talk to get a call to action, because there's a lot of talking, right? It's a lot of talking, and it's time to walk the walk, right? And to really get into some action. And so who knows best? The experts on Sidewalk Talk, my guests here on this platform know best about the call to action. So they're here to give us that. Right? So I am your host, Aaliyah Berry. For some of you who may not know me, let me take this opportunity to introduce myself. So I am a licensed clinician. I have 20 years experience working with ages 0 to 60 in a variety of settings. So I've been in daycares, I've been in schools and after school programs and summer camps, group homes, shelters, correctional facilities, in a variety of different settings, just working with a variety of different individuals. So I'm a community-based social worker. And so what community-based means to me is that this thing is a lifestyle. Right? This work here is a lifestyle. It is often found outside the four walls of an agency. A lot of times it's outside the hours of 9 to 5. And so community-based social work for me means that I am in baby showers and graduations, unfortunately at funerals and sentencing hearings, goal setting on the sidewalk, and getting hugs at a red light. So I currently work as a full-time consultant with Seeds and Berries, where I do program development, training, and direct clinical services in schools, nonprofits, and the government sector. So to keep in touch with me, you can follow me on Facebook and Instagram, Seeds and Berries, as well as Aaliyah Berry on LinkedIn. Find out more information about my services on my website, seedsandberries.com. And then if you missed this episode live, you can go to the YouTube channel and watch this episode there tomorrow. You can also check out season 1 on YouTube. So there are 10 episodes on YouTube right now that you can watch and engage in. But again, this episode will be on YouTube, Seeds and Berries as well. So before I get into the topic, right, of today, I just want to do some little bit of housekeeping, right? So first is to like, tag, and share this live broadcast. Like, tag, and share this live broadcast. So one is to like and love and laugh and show emotions throughout the broadcast. It helps my guests and I feel like there's people here, right? That we are not in a room by ourselves. So definitely react to the conversation as we go forth. You can also tag folks that you think, once you listen to the conversation and you think there are people that you feel would benefit from the conversation, then you can tag them in the comments, and then it will notify them that this conversation is going on and they can come on in the room. And the last thing is to share, right? And to share, not for popularity, but to share for impact, right? My guests and I feel we have a very important message for you on tonight. And so we wanted to be able to get into the hands that we think it belongs in. So definitely feel free to share for impact. The last piece is to comment, right? To comment on the live feed because you're joining the conversation, right? You all have expertise as well. If you have questions, then we can ask those questions. If you have additional input or insight, please add value to the conversation and do just drop it in the chat. Again, it just helps for good engagement and interaction. And so that is my housekeeping. All right. So without further ado, let's get into this topic on tonight, right? So the topic tonight on Sidewalk Talk, our premiere episode of season 2, is returning to the workplace, the do's and don'ts for team leaders. Now, let me just start by saying not necessarily all team leaders. We will be talking to everyone returning to the workplace, but there's a special kind of emphasis on team leaders because we need to get our team leaders strong in order to carry any mission that is necessary to be able to carry. And my guest here tonight has a special expertise and special experience in leadership specifically. Sidewalk Talk is very big on leadership. So returning to the workplace is on everybody's mind, right? Like we are not quite done the pandemic, and yet the transition is here. Right? And yet some of the anxiety, some of the mental health, some of these things are still present, and yet the transition is still going forth. Right? So that had to be where we started season 2 on Sidewalk Talk, to have real talk and get insight about, what we are embarking on, the season that we're embarking on. So I usually come up with a topic first of Sidewalk Talk, and then I go through my mental Rolodex and find what guest would be the expert on this particular topic. Well, family, the guest that I have here tonight is none other than Dr. Deanna Bond with Bond Consulting Group. We fondly know her as the social emotional doctor. She is an expert in adult emotional intelligence, period. But tonight we're going to be on the heavy part about adult emotional intelligence. She's going to explain what that is. She has decades of experience. She's been in large urban schools, school districts, nonprofits. So our audience here on Sidewalk Talk definitely has invested stake in these types of settings, which is why she's here on this platform. But she is a guru. She is a guru at her work. And I personally have worked with her as well. And so I have the utmost respect for Dr. Deanna Bond. And so I'm so excited that she's here as my guest to kick off season 2. I saw some hearts, and that's good. We appreciate the engagement, right? Again, like, tag, and share for impact, and comment as you feel led to, so that we can get this conversation started. So let's bring on Dr. Deanna Bond and get into the topic tonight. Hello, Dr. Bond.
Hello, Miss Aaliyah Berry. How are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
It is a pleasure. It is a pleasure. This topic could not go forth without you being the lead in this conversation right here tonight. So I know, but the audience may not. So if you could take this opportunity to introduce yourself a little more formally to the audience.
Sure. So good evening, everyone. Again, thank you, Aaliyah, for having me this evening. My name is Dr. Deanna Bond. I have a PhD in psychology, and I specialize in emotional intelligence. I have well over 20 plus years working in the public sector. And through my experience, I've worked with students and staff just around social emotional development, building teams, project management, making sure that students and staff have the best support they need around professional development. I do a lot of data analysis, strategic planning, and through my work and dissertation work, I should say, I began to realize how important it was not only to support our students, around social emotional learning, but how do we support our adults in space with them in other work environments, and how we can leverage those opportunities to teach them those skills to either advance in their careers, advance in education, and as well as build in their personal lives as well. So that's how Bond Consulting Group was birthed. And now I use that opportunity to help individuals not only in workspaces but also in my community as well. I'm a strong community advocate in supporting students, their families, and communities on leveraging education, wellness, and building those positive relationships in our communities. So it's very important for us to do this work. So not only in our communities, but also in the work environment. Mm-hmm. So again, thank you for having me.
Yes. So thank you for being here. And as I'm sure the audience can now see, is that there are several lanes that you occupy, but like all on the same highway. And so that's key because each lane on that highway is essential to the flow of traffic, if you will, for the analogy. Yes. So we appreciate, your expertise on this whole topic. So I said emotional intelligence. You just said emotional intelligence. Do we all know? I would like the official definition from you. Like, help us understand exactly what is EI, emotional intelligence.
So emotional intelligence, as I like to define it, from all the work that I've done, and you could look it up as well, but the definition really is about how does a person learn to navigate, manage their own emotions in day-to-day life, in your personal lives, in your professional careers, and how do you learn to acknowledge those emotions? How do you take those emotions and learn to navigate and engage with people? And how do you express yourself most appropriately through your feelings and emotions on a day-to-day basis?
Okay. And then I can totally understand how adult EI is a lane because that approach to that work is probably very different than teenagers or early childhood 0 to 3, like probably across the lifespan that looks very different.
It definitely does, which is why it's important for us as adults to understand our own emotional intelligence and our own skills. So then we can teach our babies, right? We can teach in these settings of education. And then as adults, how do you as a manager or leader use your own emotional skills, which some people may call these soft skills. So those skills could help you manage staff and build your own emotional intelligence. When you think about the particular skills, it's usually around self-awareness, self-regulation, understanding how to be socially aware of what's going on and how other people feel. So of course, we talk about empathy. How do you build positive relationships? And how do you communicate most effectively in various settings? And then, of course, how do you make good decisions? So all of those things are important for not only a leader, but also to teach individuals and our young people, of course. But when we're talking about in work settings, it's important for a leader to be able to understand their own emotional intelligence in order to then build the staff people that they work with and lead.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what is on everybody's mind is now our topic for tonight, right? And like when it was thinking about the very first topic for season 2, and we're looking at September 2021. September 2021, what is on everyone's mind and what do we need to have real talk about? What do we need to have nuanced conversations about and unpack things that are not really being discussed? Returning to the workplace. Returning to the workplace is definitely on everyone's mind and very much rooted in the land of EI, as you have described. So what would you say that you're observing? I guess even like observing in the workplace from now, I had to do the math. I'll be transparent. 19 months. 19 months after we were told like it would be 2 weeks. So 19 months ago, right? Like walk us through what you have observed in the workplace and through the lens of EI, kind of through this journey, and like how normal has been redefined.
So I think for everybody, right, this pandemic has really brought light to a lot of different things on a personal level and professional level. And I think as a leader, I've always been very adamant about how I interact with my staff. How do I lead by example? And how do I leverage their skills in the work environment as team members? So all throughout the pandemic, nothing that I did not do in space, I did as well when we were working from home. So, in my experience, I'm the leader that walks around in the morning to check in, checking temperatures, not just for my students, but also for my team members. So throughout the pandemic, that was check-ins, whether it's through text messaging, whether it's through a group chat that a team member might have started. So it really was trying to make sure that I was checking temperature, checking in on my staff. A lot of times staff members or team members or family members were losing people through this pandemic. So you can't ignore those kind of things. While we do set expectations and there's roles and responsibilities that we have as employees and team members, but we're also human too. So, as we transition back, I continue to check in on how my teams were feeling about transitioning, not only working in home environment, but going back in the workplace. So it's important for me to see how they were feeling about coming back in space and not ignoring those things. So, for a lot of people, not just my team, just other people that I know, there was a lot of anxiety about going back in the workplace, and making sure that leaders and businesses try to prepare as much because we don't know what to expect, but we do need to check in to see how people are feeling, acknowledging those things, and providing resources for them as much as possible. And to me, like this new normal, it shouldn't be defined by a leader. This new normal needs to be a team conversation. It's important to make sure that people's mental wellness is taken into consideration. People that know me, they know I'm big on wellness and taking mental health leads. It's important for us to acknowledge those things and provide those resources to our staff members. But for me, when we speak about normal, normal is never going to be the normal that we know or knew from before. We have to redefine what that looks like. And I think that definition is going to be different in different settings. So assessment of the work environment is very important.
And so it sounds like one is like before the returning to workplace, like while everybody was home and quarantining, you were using the same foundational leadership skills and qualities that you already have, because like, spoiler alert for the audience, but like Dr. Deanna Bond is one of the best leaders I've ever known. And so some of her best practices, for example, checking in with her staff every morning, she just had to get creative, is what I'm hearing you say. Like, the best practices were still in place, but then needing to get creative, but then acknowledging that the normal will never be what it was ever again. And the acknowledgement piece, and then the assessment. So, like, assessing what is normal now.
And assessing what is normal now, Leah, sometimes changes day by day. So, while we want to prepare, I think the preparation really is around already having an infrastructure. And how do you pivot? As everybody's using this word.
That's a big word now.
But how do you alter some of the systems you already have and make the best out of the situation?
And so pivoting, right, as a segue to kind of our next question, is pivoting can be extremely stressful. And assessment can be daunting. It can be frustrating. What is in front of, and like you said, that's so true about like every day, the normal changes. Like and we're not built for this. Like humans are not built for this. There's no instruction manual that came with this. But when it comes to leaders assessing their normal every day and pivoting every day and often falling on our faces, brushing ourselves off and trying again, it's a good segue to our own wellness as leaders. So like when we're talking about this adjustment, we're going to kind of talk about some do's and don'ts that leaders should do when it comes to their own wellness. I guess talk to us a little bit about that before we get into the do's and the don'ts. But just leaders' wellness, why is that so important?
So I think it's important, first of all, you have to acknowledge your own feelings about transitioning back into this workplace, right? Because your team is looking for you for leadership.
Yes.
And while you acknowledge how you're feeling, you can't ignore those feelings. So you have to address them, again, on a daily basis. Some days are, I'm great going into the office, and then some days it can be anxiety about the travel, the parking, being safe when you're in space. So it's just really important to acknowledge how you're feeling. I'm always doing a check and balance with myself before I walk into a building, so that I am prepared to be my best version of myself, to lead my team. So, it's very important to, again, acknowledge how you're feeling, and when you need help and when you need assistance, that you seek out that help. And that you lean on, accountability partners, you lean on, whatever you use to get you through a day, whether it's prayer, whether it's meditation, whether it's a peer group that you use. And I also, too, I leverage my team in a way that, I was always this leader that I had to do myself, just so I knew it was done right. And I had to learn to delegate as much as I can, when I can, to leverage like the skills in my team. But definitely making sure that I acknowledge how I felt, but then also to be that hearing and listening ear for my team when they need someone to lean on as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, this is a little unplanned question, right, Dr. Bond? Okay. But I'm thinking just having supported staff over the last year and a half, both of us have, supported emotional health of staff over the last year and a half. And what continues to come up is the superhero syndrome. Right. Yes. And we have, the capes, and especially in this field, right? Like folks just want to save people, right? Miss Berry's not here to save anyone. We're empowering folks to save themselves, right? Yeah. But that superhero syndrome, and in a recently I heard someone say like they have it double knotted, like their cape is double knotted, like not just regular, And so when I hear you describing, well, check in with yourself and, lean into prayer and meditation. And then you said, lean into your support network. Because oftentimes as leaders, who's checking in with us? Right? Yes. The strong always have to be strong. And often that's the leader of the team, right? Yes. Like who's checking on the strong people? And then the last part you said about, leaning on the team that you lead. What I've been hearing a lot, not only is superhero syndrome, but pride. Yes. And no, I'm fine, right? Like, I did a temperature check, Dr. Bond, this morning. Yes, I'm fine. I'm fine. Yes. I'm fine. It was my 3-year-old's first day of school, but I'm fine.
Right. Yep.
So what do you say to those folks that are listening to you right now saying like, yeah, all that sounds cute, but like, I don't have time for all that, or my team knowing that I'm not well, they're going to look at me as weak. What do you say to all that?
Understood. I mean, and again, it's about building those positive relationships. So it's back to that EI, right? It's building those positive relationships with your team. Me saying team, listen, today is a day that was a rough day for me, but I'm going to push through. It's okay to do that. Not too much to share too much, but enough to say like, today is a day that wasn't a good day for me, but I'm going to push through. Now has team members checking in on me at the end of the day, like I check on them. So it's important to be human, but at the same time, you still have boundaries and expectations. But again, checking in on yourself, having your own routine, and knowing that when you need that downtime, you have to shut it off. Even if it's an hour, to yourself. Take that lunch break. I would say I've been that one will eat through the lunch, and not take that time away from my computer. And sometimes I'm still doing that. I'm checking my email as I'm eating my lunch. And you have to learn to step away and give yourself that mental break. Because usually when I do that mental break, it allows me to reassess and see things that I wasn't thinking about when I was in the grip.
So that's a great point. That's a great point, because sometimes people have to identify their why, like why even self-care, boundaries, taking a break, not working through my lunch. But what you said is that I don't even see clearly the work when you're not well. And if that's not a why, I don't know what else is a why.
And also, listen, even my weekends. I tell people my weekends are to myself,
yes, you do,
to my family and loved ones, right? I love it. I'm glad to be here tonight. Yes. But this is normally my day to meditate, even more, pray even more, and prepare for the week. But it allows me that I have to say, like, this is my downtime, because if not, you won't ever get it. You won't ever get it.
Yeah.
And so it's important to do that. Those for yourself before you can lead.
Absolutely. And so you do walk the walk, not just talk the talk. And yes, we all know that Sidewalk Talk on a Sunday was an exception. So we appreciate you being here and working on a Sunday, Dr. Bond. So you've already mentioned, we're going to kind of, do's and don'ts will probably flow throughout this whole conversation. Yes. We already did mention some do's, which will kind of circle back and summarize all the do's. But what are some don'ts? Like, if you are watching this and you're doing some of this that she's about to say, pivot, right? So what are some don'ts? What should leaders definitely watch out for and not to be doing right now?
So what I say, I know we talk about these do's or don'ts, but for me, it's just best practices. It really is knowing your work environment, knowing your team, and don't assume anything. Right? Don't assume that when people open the doors and say, "Oh, you got to go back to work," that everybody was comfortable with that.
Right.
Don't assume that people aren't having anxiety about it. Don't assume that they aren't dealing with things at home that really needs to be addressed, on their end. And sometimes it spills into the work environment. So you have to help them know how to navigate that work and life, work and home life balance. So it's important to make sure that you're just mindful of what's going on in your work environment. And you have to pivot the culture, lead by example, and make sure that when things do come up that you can address those things. Because we can't just assume that because you went back to work, that what people was experiencing through this whole pandemic, they're not continuing to experience now. Because as your point earlier, it's not over.
Correct.
We just don't know what tomorrow looks like. You try to plan, you try to prep. But it's important for us to just make sure that we're aware of our environment and we're aware of what's going on with our staff as they come back into a workplace. And I want to say lastly is don't judge about how people feel, what they believe, and really just help them, resolve some of the things that they may be experiencing. And then if it's personal things that we can't do in a work environment, pushing them and encouraging them to leverage some of the things that they may be able to use, whether it's mental health, whether it's employee assistance plan, assistance, and then making sure that you build a culture where there's things such as this is sports pod that we've done for staff that gives them space where leaders may not be in space, but their colleagues may be in space, or other people that are experiencing the same thing that they're experiencing are in a space with them where they can just be honest, open, and get some resources and tips.
And I think that the assumptions and the judgment piece is so important. Like, it cannot be overemphasized. I want to even further emphasize it and ask you, if not, right? Like, I saw Tashia wrote relationship foundation, right?
Yeah.
Because like building relationship, if you are making assumptions right through here and judging right through here what people have experienced and what they're walking in the door with, I want to ask you, what is at stake? Like, what could really go wrong from doing those two don'ts in particular?
I mean, of course, when you think about the mental state of everybody, mental breakdowns, right? People suffers in silence a lot of times. And I'm not saying that as leaders we have to be therapists. That's just our, that's just what we do as professionals. But, beyond the counseling lens and beyond the educational lens, just as leaders, is acknowledging when your staff is struggling, right? And when their mindset is not mentally there to do work, I need you to take a mental health break. Whether it's a mental health day, whether it's making sure that you don't do anything for the weekend and you're just reflecting. But I think a lot of times what I do is, as a leader, I try to, in my conversations and in my supervisions, it's not just about the work. The first thing I ask is, how are you today? Right? In the work, is there anything that's challenging you or that you feel like you just can't resolve or get through? What do you need from me as a leader? And then those leadership skills I see in my staff, how do I leverage those things so that they can continue to be self-aware of what they bring to the table?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. And so, because again, a lot of times we are very task driven, right?
Yes.
Like, we are
Yes.
so task driven, and coming back into the workplace, if we come back in with the tasks on our mind, right? I don't, like, there may be a part of you that feels like you don't have time to ask that staff member how they are doing.
No, I had to do that.
Exactly.
I had to.
Yeah.
Right? There's nothing wrong with me checking in. If you told me last week, I had some things I had to get done. When I see you, or I'm texting you to say, how did everything go? Mm-hmm. If you're telling me that you're sick and I got to go to the doctors, I'm telling my staff, you don't have to tell me what's wrong, but at least check in with me, let me know everything went okay.
Right.
That's just what I do.
Right. But that
doesn't mean everybody has to, but it builds that relationship with my staff, that while I do have expectations of them, while there are boundaries that I set, I still have to make sure you're okay as a person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna kind of skip around, because that's a good segue to just like how you build this relationship, how you keep these professional boundaries. Like, how much should an employer be in an employee's personal life? Like, where do you draw the line? Especially because, as you said earlier, like, coming back into this, I can't even say post-pandemic, like we said earlier, because it's not post, but coming back into this workplace, folks are bringing in a lot and possibly leaking into the workplace. And then you spoke about culture. So, like, what is too personal? Mm-hmm. And how do you support appropriately without crossing the lines as my employer? And as you said, no, this sidewalk talk is not turning anyone into therapists.
Right.
But so how does the employer be personal without being too personal, especially what folks are bringing in is very personal, right, in this season?
Yeah. So again, I think it's making sure that we're providing resources for our staff. No leader should be a therapist. And while a lot of personal things bleed into the workplace, setting the boundaries of what I can support you on and what you're going to have to seek outside help with. And that doesn't mean you're going to therapy necessarily. But if you're telling me that childcare is an issue, then like, how do you resolve and how do you find ways to, get your childcare together so that you can come to work? you know. There's nothing wrong with people sharing, and it's not about me being in my employee's business. It's allowing them to share what they need to share. Mm-hmm. And that's not, imposing or invading too much of their, their personal space. You allow them to share what they need to share. And then you try to help them resolve, or again, how to come up with resources that we can find in space, if we can, and if we not, make sure that we're reaching out to communities and other entities that probably could support our staff. I think sometimes we try to, draw these lines or put up these walls that we don't want to address the personal things that are going on in our staff lives. But I think it's important, like now, just in what we've experienced, we have to be a little bit more, forgiving and gracious to what's going on around us.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I'm going to circle back to that gracious part, because in our pre-meeting, you mentioned a dichotomy that I think is really interesting to lift up here tonight. But my initial question about this personal boundary but professional kind of balance is, over the last, year and a half supporting staff, I have also found that I don't want my boss, and I'm using that word on purpose, right? I don't want my boss to know what I'm going through. I don't want them to know childcare is an issue. I don't want them to know I have anxiety. I don't want them to know that I'm crying on my way to work, right? I don't want them to know that my somebody died the night before. Right? Because I don't want my boss to question my capacity. I don't want my boss to think that I'm weak, that I cannot perform. And so and so then we're doing the sidewalk talk and we're trying to train leaders, right? But what do you say to the team member, the employee that's saying, I don't want to tell my boss that I'm melting down? And then the boss is looking to support the person melting down. Right. So they have a wall up and we're not getting anything accomplished. What do you say to the employee who honestly doesn't want to be that transparent and vulnerable for fear?
Understood. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's an honest feeling, right? I think that a lot of people feel that way.
Yeah.
It just may be in my experience that my team or my teams can come to me in that way. And not just the team I currently have, teams I've had in the past, that I've always set those boundaries that they know I'm going to be there and supportive of you. However, there's still accountability there. But I also feel that we have to create cultures that our employees can rely on each other, right? That there's a culture where if you can't talk to the leader, you should be able to talk to a colleague, if you can. If not, then how do we help a person then acknowledge who is in your life, or do you have any people in your life that you can lean on? And if it's not, what kind of support groups can you join?
Yes. And support groups are now national, right? You can have a support group with somebody in California from the East Coast, because now COVID normal has allowed for that. So get support laterally if the leader is not approachable in that way. And then what do you say to the leader that's saying, well, look, Dr. Bond, if my employee does come in and say that they are in mental health crisis or, melting down in a way that would affect their capacity and their performance, and we have things to do, right? We're tasked, the tasks need to be done. I mean, what do you even say to that leader? Because the strong one on your team very well could be coming in next week melting down under the pressure of COVID.
So again, I think that's where it goes to us pivoting as a team. Why you're not going to divulge and tell somebody's business to other team members, right? But you do want to figure out how can you leverage the skills of others and how you can continue to, help that individual become more self-aware of what things trigger them when you got to come back in space. Because we can't ignore those things. We still have to help that person be as productive as possible. And just reassess what the team can support all, but also to reassess what the individual can do.
And now I've heard you say that word several times in this conversation, is to assess. Assessment. Yeah.
And maybe there's just a psychologist in me, but even when we had to, pivot to the pandemic, the first thing was, how can I turn our normal practices into a virtual model?
Yep. And that took assessment of what was in front of us in order to pivot correctly.
What was working already, successfully, and even allows us to see what holes and what things we needed to plug up and what things we needed to reevaluate and say, well, maybe this didn't work so well. Right? And it also allowed us to build better partnerships, not with, just within our organization, but our partnerships with outside people as well.
Yes, and so there's a lot of silver lines, right? And there's a lot of silver lines over the last year and a half, and I've also heard folks say, like, if we go back to normal, then that would, the old normal, then this would be in vain, right? Like, there are certain normals that should die, and that should be left in the past. So it's kind of a good segue to coming up to more macro level, right? Coming up to the 90,000 foot view. Like, we're talking a lot about the soft skills and the wellness and relationship building and how to interact with our staff. Coming up to the 90,000 foot view and looking at systems and infrastructure, like, how does EI play into our systems and our infrastructure to be able to support folks?
So of course, when we talk about EI, it could be various things that we talked about, already here. But I think it really is about that building positive professional relationships, right? How do you be very innovative in this new space? How do you leverage the skills that your teams have? And how do you make sure that you can sustain all of this? The new normal, as we talk about, we don't know, may change again next year, but we have to see what's in front of us and just make sure that the work that we're doing is meaningful, can help us produce outcomes. But when we talk about building our teams, building individuals, it's important to leverage emotional intelligence as much as possible, whether it's through communication, whether it's through, conflict resolution, whether it's through better decision making. So when you do assess, it really should help to inform, best practices. And again, leveraging those infrastructure that may have been there already and seeing what really worked and what didn't.
So as an example, communication, right?
Yes.
I'm thinking of an example, and I'm going to say what not to do, and then you tell us what to do, right? So an example of a communication infrastructure that has been in place not since the beginning of time, but for quite some time, which is email, right? So email is an example of a piece of infrastructure that we use to communicate, right? Dear so-and-so, I hope this email finds you well, right? And so what you just said about communication and checking in with the staff members and checking in on their temperatures, right? That line, family, I'm not Dr. Bond, because right? But that line is not checking in with your staff members. So sometimes there's like infrastructure that's in place and like, I'm totally like emotionally, I hope that their email finds them well every time. Right? That's not it. And so like so you said during the pandemic, you would text to do temperature checks, right? So like systems wise, what if there was a task that needed to be done first thing in the morning? Like, how do you check in on a temperature? And how can you really check in on temperature in email? What if I don't see my staff as often? I don't see them daily, let's say.
Understood. So, it does. So for me, I'm the type of person where I'm checking emails 3 times before it goes out already. Just because I need to check and make sure that the tone of the email is, is professional. Nobody wouldn't feel offended about how I type the email. So I've even changed the way I address, good morning, so-and-so. Thank you for this email. It is great to hear from you, right? So, a lot of times email is very formal. So for me, even if it's not a text, it's me picking up the phone to have a conversation.
Yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Because
so my task, it might be a task that needs to get done. I'm going to call you, hey, such and such. How's your day going? How's the family? Now, they tell me, good. By the way, this task we need to get done today, how are we going to chip away at this task today? Can you do it alone, or do I need to bring in other team members? We get through that, and then we do a check-in, check-in at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Somebody said you are the check-in. Mika said you are the check-in queen, and I agree.
I check in on my friends like that too.
Yes, I'm clear on that. And I learned that from Dr. Deanna Bond as well, Mika. So yes, she is the check-in queen, and so I appreciate you just saying picking up the phone. Because I've heard many staff say, I got an email that said, and again, this is sidewalk talk. So like real talk, if this is you as a leader, rewind and try again. Because, folks were getting emails that said your new in-person work schedule is Monday at 8:30. See you then.
Yes.
What? We've been home for 19 months and you're going to send me an email that says when my in-person it's deeper than that.
And there's nothing wrong with pulling your team together, like in an informal meeting, right? To say, listen, you guys, this is what it looks like. And being honest, this is what I know. This is what I don't know. The things I don't know, I'm going to try to get answers for, right? I only can give you what I know. And sometimes they had questions, after the fact, but it was important for me to make sure that I understood how they felt about returning. And then when we return, it's still talking about like, how are we going to be able to maintain this and get through each day?
Mm-hmm. And we're in this together, and I don't know either, right? That's definitely a best practice. Just I would assume that some people feel uncomfortable being that vulnerable in front of their team,
and some people are uncomfortable. And and some leaders are not that leader. Mm-hmm. But you got to find a way to find some balance that you are giving yourself the opportunity to just check in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
You may not be that person that checks in every morning, right? You may not be that person that's going to check in every week, but larger teams, checking on a monthly basis when you can. Or you hire managers that or individuals in your department that can provide that additional support for teams.
Which that right there is infrastructure and systems, like identifying manpower that is specifically allocated to wellness. It's time for that.
Piece about, I think that's really what we need to do, is really looking at companies and businesses, looking at that lane on how we can build the manpower, to your point, to make sure that you have staff that is designated to wellness, staff development, right? So it's important to do those things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And to build that manpower into the system, right? Because because if you're not the kind of leader to do that, well, bring it in, and that should have been in the workplace 10 years ago. I mean,
and also to a leader, it's important to make sure that when people don't want to share, it is okay. So when you talk about those boundaries and how much are you in your staff's business, you give them space to come if they need to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Not like, I was watching this thing on Sunday night and I want you to tell me your childhood story. Like, no. Like, let's not take this too left. Yeah.
You give space. You hold space, right? You have that psychological space and that culture that if you need to come to me, you can. Because I'm not saying that every team member comes to me and says personal things, but they know that if it's, hey, Dr. Bond, this is what I'm experiencing. I don't necessarily want to tell you, be full disclosure, but I am going through some things. I do need to take some time off, or it is affecting me. Then let's have a conversation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so then I think this is when I'll bring this piece up. You said in the pre-meeting about like the balance between grace and accountability. And you have already mentioned the word gracious and you have mentioned the word accountability. So where do we find the balance between the two? Because at the end of the day, like if, Johnny is melting down on the team and missing deadlines and dropping the ball on important work, and like we're in important work that's doing human work, right? I can't have you drop the ball on a young person as an example. Lives, exactly, human lives. So, how do we do the extending grace piece, but also hold accountable?
Again, it's teaching that person to be self-aware of what they really are experiencing. And it's important that, yes, you set boundaries. There are accountability goals that we have to hit. And if you can't hit it, then let's get you some help. Or you seek help how you feel like you need to seek help. Because we do have to still do the work, but also to acknowledge that people are experiencing things that we've never experienced before. And even you as an individual reassessing, can I continue to do this type of work? I may need to look at myself and say, maybe this isn't the work I want to do anymore. And I think through the pandemic, a lot of people looked at things like, what can I do? Is this the job I kind of want to be in anymore? So all those things, came out in this experience that we all had. And again, that's why I said, being gracious is making sure that you're acknowledging that you don't understand what somebody else experienced. Unless they tell you.
Right. And so we really have no idea what everyone has been, where we've been the last 19 months, physically, where we've been emotionally, where we've been mentally, spiritually. I mean, there's no handbook. And I see Ina Johnson talking about empathy, right? Like, and empathy and grace, I think, goes super hand in hand. And then to your point, and that's an excellent point, like, maybe I don't even want to do this work. I think that and maybe the stress level or my why for why I used to do this work that used to drive and motivate me to my passion is not my why anymore. Maybe I want to do a different angle of the same work, but not this lane. And that's
look at me. My angle was working with students around social emotional learning. I was like you said, I'm this guru is what you call me. Because
not just what I call you, that's what you are, Dr. Bond. You are a guru. Go ahead.
But then I had to realize that us as adults are experiencing the same thing some of our children are experiencing as it relates to emotional intelligence. We always have to, reflect. So, through my journey of just working in different environments, it really was me looking and saying, how can I use this and leverage these skills that I teach my young people every day and help the adults, not the adults that's only interacting with children, but how do you help adults that's interacting with other adults every day? So when people think about technical skills, if you look at jobs now, everybody's looking for people to have this emotional intelligence skills. They change that language of soft skills. That's really what it is. How do you best communicate? Right? How are you able to communicate appropriately when it comes to business relationships? How do you help make decisions in space? How are you able to analyze information and be a team member? Be a leader. It takes all of those things to lead people.
Right. And operating in this new insight, discernment, empathy, grace, pivoting, constant assessment place on what the new normal is. So then, and you've already given some advice because we didn't want the conversation to be exclusively on leadership, but it definitely was a heavy emphasis, in just helping to guide leaders, because at the end of the day, like, who do leaders have to go to, and where are we getting our guidance from? So that was the kind of conversation that we wanted to have, you and I, today. So just to kind of wrap up, if you can then explain, I mean, I think that if folks were watching this, you can see her skill set. But if you can explain kind of exactly what you do consulting wise, and how like the services that you offer and how folks can engage with you, to bring you into their workplace to do what?
So my company, Bond Consulting Group, is I do one-on-one consulting with individuals as well as teams, from leadership into in their teams as well, to make sure that they're learning to leverage emotional skills, to navigate, throughout their personal lives, professional careers, as well as their educational journeys. And how do we make sure that we can use emotional intelligence to be the best version of yourself, is basically what the goal is of the work that I do. Because I think oftentimes we forget about the degree, with the degrees that we have and the work that we do on a day to day. We forget about ourselves, right? So for me, wellness is important. To your point, and my experience has been well over 20 years, and a lot of the work has been in helping others, and bettering themselves. But sometimes I was forgetting about myself, right? And making sure that my own mental health wellness was well, um, help me, to just become the best version of myself. So it's important for people to understand that you can definitely build these skills even as an adult. These are skills that I learn every day. You learn different skills, in different work environments, in your education. And it's just important for us to make sure that we help adults as much as we help our young people. So people can find me on social media. I'm on Instagram at BCG_LLC, or they can email me at bondcg.llc@gmail. I'm also on LinkedIn under Dr. Bond, so they can also find me there as well.
Okay, and I will post that information in the next screen so everyone will be able to see it. We thank you. I'm so grateful for this Sunday opportunity. First of all, yes. making the exception to your own mental health, Dr. Bond, to be here today and to help guide us.
Thank you so much for Leah for having me, and it's always a pleasure having great conversations with you and making sure that we can support the people, leaders, team members, as well as our communities.
Absolutely. So you are appreciated. You are appreciated, and we care about your wellness. And so to keep leading and keep helping to guide, spaces through this unprecedented season, we appreciate you. So I always tell all my guests that, because sometimes we don't feel that appreciated, and sometimes this weight is very heavy, right? And so it is. I just want you to know that we see you. So thank you, and have a wonderful rest of the night.
You too. Thank you.
Wow, family. Wow. So that was excellent. I'm so grateful that we had such a discussion like this on today. So I'm just going to quickly summarize the action steps. I mean, there were so many do's and don'ts and so much rich material and advice, guidance that Dr. Bond gave us on tonight. But just kind of the pieces that stand out is like finding a balance between grace and accountability when we're leading our teams. There is no handbook for this, right? To make sure that we are keeping our own wellness strong as leaders, for us to get the support that we need, for us to cope in the way that we need to. For us to be able to be somewhat vulnerable in front of our teams. And that does not necessarily make us weak, right? For us to be vulnerable with our teams. And for them to then, as she said, to be a role model and an example in the workplace, so that they feel comfortable, sharing with us as well. We need to come together at this time, and people are walking in with a lot. And so having wellness and our own emotional intelligence. She even talked about weaving and building manpower into the infrastructure of your workplace that is focused and dedicated to wellness. I mean, we've needed that 10 years ago, right? And so even somebody in the chat, Thomas Owens, because I've gotten this from him, which is if we go like some of our normal from the past, needs to die, right? It needs to go in the ground and die, because if we go back to some of the normal that we've been before, all of this would be in vain. And so Mr. Owens has said that, and so we look forward to the new. We look forward to the fresh seasons, but we have to see each other. We have to see each other, and we have to be able to see ourselves. And so Dr. Bond gave us an amazing conversation of do's and don'ts. Her information is down here. If you need support in navigating workplace emotional intelligence, then you can schedule a consultation call with Dr. Bond. She does one-on-ones, she does trainings, she talked about strategic planning. So she's able to work with leadership teams. She's able to establish a wellness culture, an emotionally intelligent, strong culture in the workplace. So she is a guru in this work. And so definitely reach out to her regarding her consulting services. So again, that is kind of our conversation on today. I am happy to have had this conversation. It was very necessary, and to launch season 2 on this topic was important. So again, my name is Aaliyah Berry. I work as a consultant with Seeds and Berries, where I do program development training and direct clinical services in schools, nonprofit, and the government sector. So to keep in touch with me, you can keep in touch Facebook and Instagram on Seeds and Berries, Aaliyah Berry on LinkedIn. And then this episode will be on the Seeds and Berries YouTube channel tomorrow. You can also check out all of season 1, which was 10 powerful episodes with 10 dynamic guests talking about topics from the front lines of Newark, New Jersey. We were not necessarily specific today about Newark, but most of the episodes are from Newark, New Jersey, where we are gaining insight, clarifying misconceptions, and getting a call to action by frontline workers. So check out those 10 episodes and continue to stay tuned. Don't forget to like, tag, and share. And share for impact. And yeah, so I will see you next time, right? Next time. And the question is, what is next time, and what will we be talking about next time? Well, we will be here again on September 26th. And today we talked about staff, right? And she specifically talked about school staff and supporting, not just school staff, but workplace staff. But she does have experience in schools. And so if we're talking about the adults first, then here in September 2021, we have to talk about students, because our babies are going back to school. And so how do we really wrap our arms around our young people right through here? I have a dynamic guest coming in to talk about love, systems, love, relationship building, how to see our young people and see what they're really carrying. He is a guru in that area. And so we're going to be talking about how to support our young people as they also embark on a transition into the next place. So thank you for your support on tonight, and we look forward to seeing you on September 26th, same time. Have a good night.